Hello and welcome for more of the FDG TV 2022 goodness. I'm your host, Tommy Thompson, and of course I am joined once again by my wonderful co-host, Anne Sullivan. Hello Anne, how are you doing today?
Hello, doing well. Today we have Zoe helping with the co-hosting.
Where's Kaylee? Just give up, just not...
Kaylee's taking the day off, it's in her contract.
I was going to say, yeah, it's probably something, there's probably specific rules on cats being involved in academic, like lo-fi conference coverage programs.
And absolutely.
This is really the point of this whole exercise, is if you're at the conference, if you're at the Foundation of Digital Games conference, or you're chilling out wherever you are in the world, you get to hang out with us in a kind of, it's been written in our description, in our production notes, as a lo-fi conference coverage that you can relax and take notes to, and maybe even I'll put in some beats in the final mix.
Please do. Yes.
I'm doing it right now. You're just enjoying the music. That's what's happening.
All right. Yeah, so we're halfway through FDG 2022, which is kind of incredible. It feels like it just started. And so we have a fantastic show lined up. But first, most importantly, Biscuit Watch.
I should have like a graphic that goes, Biscuit Watch, something like that. Yeah, so because if you were watching the FDG TV last year, I had a bad habit of I got really engrossed in biscuit discourse, I think on one occasion, and then subsequently our production team said I should never do it again. But for yourself, actually, I did. Specifically, this is just entirely for you, Anne, was because I was in Scotland just last week. Actually, I was in Scotland this week. I only got back yesterday. And I got to have an Empire biscuit, which I don't get to have very often. Because even though I live in England, and technically Great Britain is, an amorphous blob of 3 different countries mashed together, we don't often sell the same things in our respective stores. And so Empire biscuits are a particular biscuit you can only get in Scotland. It was previously known as a Lindsay biscuit. And then apparently the British or the English in particular, got very fussy about that idea during the Great Wars.
Okay, what flavor is an Empire biscuit?
So an Empire biscuit is essentially 2 bits of like shortbread biscuit, but it's got jam in the middle and it has icing on top.
That actually sounds quite good.
It's amazing. And you can buy it in any supermarket, except when you go to England, and I hate it. Anyway.
I hope they fix that for you, Tommy.
Only been waiting 10 years. I don't think it's going to change anytime soon.
Well, I mean, you found one once. I think...
Moving on.
Yeah, I think given the little messages I keep seeing in all caps. Yeah, so today we're going to be interviewing Courtney Blamey, who is going to be joining us second. And we've got more artworks with Mike in Best Paper Watch. But before all that, we have our first guest. So...
All right, so we're now here in this wonderful single frame, which gives us an opportunity for production to quietly scooch in our wonderful 2 guests for today's session. Please give a warm welcome to Sav Ho and Mimi Perez Escobar, who are here to talk to us about queer indie games. Hello, everyone. Give me some applause.
Hey, hello, welcome. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Also, I want to take a moment just to thank you both for joining us because of time differences and everything else. No one person in this call is in the same continent, as near as I can tell. So we're spread all over the world. I totally appreciate this can be very early or very late for one or everyone involved.
Yes. Yeah, we have Zav here from Australia, and Meme, you're in Colombia currently, correct? Yes. So a lot of times.
And you're in the States, and Tommy, are you in England?
I'm in the UK, yes.
Yes. Yeah. So we've got quite a few time zones represented. So what we're actually here to talk about, though, is your paper that is an FDG TV, which is called Queer Indie Games on itch.io, 2013 to 2022, which is going to be in the games criticism and analysis track. And in conference time, that will be tomorrow, Wednesday, September 7th. And so in this paper, you look at all the games tagged with LGBT on itch.io, and you do a deeper dive into 61 of those games in order to derive patterns of queer games, and including the technologies being used, core themes that are established, price points, platforms, and more, which sounds like a fantastic paper. And so I just wanted to start with the basics. Queer, it means a lot of different things to different people. And so I think it'd be really helpful for our viewers if you, for them to know, how do you define a queer game?
And maybe I'll go first, and then
yes.
we can jump in a little bit later, right? Yeah, so when we conceived the idea for the paper back in November the year before, I think we wanted to have the paper to be focused on LGBTQ communities. It's not just about games that feature a single character that happen to have an arc or happen to be the main character, or be a side character, but the game is actually centered on an experience or multiple people's experiences in the LGBTQ community. So we wanted to approach queer games a bit differently from just looking at mainstream representation, but rather looking at papers that are made by people who lived through those experiences, and they're going to tell it the way it is, the way that they experienced it in the games itself. So even though we say queer games, that's kind of the focus that we had. I'm not sure if maybe want us to add to that, and we can kind of keep building on the shape of this queer games idea.
Yeah, I think that also the idea that we had when we were defining queer indie games was that we wanted games that supported representation in any form. So we were not close to any specific way of representation or to any kind of game. We were very open to say, hey, this is a queer game because this supports and promotes representation in any way. So yeah, I think that was like our main focus, and that's why our paper was very broad, like the games that we analyzed, yes.
Yeah, and that reminds me, when we started the paper discussion, Remedios, we're also looking into the intersectionality of that, right? So we looked at representation in the LGBT community, but also do, say, older people feature in these games? We were actually, at some point, was interested into elderly people in the representation. We were also looking at people who are coming from all kinds of socioeconomical factors, what kind of struggles they might have had. And we were trying to figure out what would be a sensible point to tackle, a good way to say, maybe this is one way to look at it. It's not just about that there is all kinds of people, but these are specific things that we found. Eventually, we did have to focus on, I think, the themes rather than the people that were in it, just because there were just so many. Like, every game was so unique. It's really hard to say this is a game about these type of people. It's more like this is their story, and they're trying to tell it.
Right. That's great. It's nice to have that deeper look as opposed to, the surface representation that might, it would expand what you were looking at. But I agree. I think it's nice that you chose something that's a much deeper experience.
Yeah, like I found it really interesting reading through the paper, given that it seems like there's a lot of further discussion that can come out of this. You actually pulled out so many interesting statistics about all of the games that you'd analysed over the period. And like you say, I think one of them was certainly the stories that were being told, that quite often these are quite individual personal stories. But one of the things I think that maybe ties into this was that in the study you found that visual novels were by far the most common game that actually had the LGBT label attached to it on itch. And I wondered, from yourselves, like why you think that is. Is it about the format being amenable to the subject matter, or was it more down to the economic situations of tools that are perhaps available?
Oh my goodness, when we were looking at the games, I remember as an anecdote in our research, we were like, okay, we need to select some games out of the 2,000 games that we have, and like more than half of them are like visual novels. So we made a conscious effort in the balancing of our initial investigation, just looking at, starting from 3 and then 6 and then 9 and 12. Maybe we shouldn't all look at visual novel games because there were so many of them. So we actually started to say, okay, what do we like as researchers, and what are things out there that we don't like, that we might not be our target demographic, but we should still look at them, and they're not visual novels. So we made a very conscious effort to look up like things like adventure games, things that's about cooking, things that is about moving from your hometown and now you're a university student. And they're not all visual novels. They could come from point and click. They could come from some kind of a management kind of a game. And yeah, I remember just just talking to Remedios and Natalie about, okay, so today we all found some games. Did we look at non-visual novels today so we can make sure that we cover them as well? But I think I got sidetracked there, but maybe wants to jump in there first.
Yeah, well, I think the reason why we found so many visual novels, and something that I like about the visual novels, is that they have this chance that you can have multiple endings and they can be totally different, and they create like many plot twists in the stories. And I think that's very interesting in the narrative. That's why when Xavier was mentioning before that all the games are very unique, because you won't find any that is similar to another because the stories are so different. I think the visual novels allow that very easily and very smoothly in the games to change and create a plot twist. So yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, and that just reminds me, I was also thinking from a game design perspective. We didn't sort of discuss this in the paper, but it's like, how would you represent a story in a game? You could say a game mechanic, perhaps you need to buy something to do something, perhaps you have to collect something to do something that kind of uncovers that kind of game mechanic. It's kind of, I suppose, easier when you have a visual novel where it's more story driven and narrative driven. You can really let the story be its own shape of the game, right? So rather than saying this is a mechanic that you have to do something, but it's an experience that you go through and you're making decisions, and that's part of the game. So, like aside from the obvious reasons of, Ren'Py and Twine being completely free and open source, which I think are great tools that are used in education and makers of all kinds, it's quite nice to see that human stories can be embedded just through text and sound and visuals that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And because they're free, democratization of storytelling, and I could see that would also be welcoming to many communities as well. So there's so much to look at. So one thing I wanted to talk to you about is that your research looks at themes in queer indie games. Is there, through all of that work, all of the things that you were looking at and the things that you're researching, is there a theme that you would like to highlight that you found particularly novel compared to other indie games? And I'll let Mei get this one.
I would say that we found like a theme that was related to discussing uncomfortable topics in the group of big games that we found. And I thought for me it was very interesting because I really love the idea of discussing topics that we don't know much and we don't know how to talk with people about it. And I love the way how visual novels, many visual novels that we found, they were able to talk about different things and also like allow the player and to understand how it is to get into these kind of topics, and also like getting a very smooth and for it. So for instance, we had like this game called Talks to My Mom, and it was all about uncomfortable conversations with our mother. So it was very interesting, like taking the place, like the position of this player and asking weird things, and you don't know what the answer is going to be. And because it's a visual novel, you can have like totally different answers to the same questions in the way, depending on the direction that you go. So I think for me, that theme was very interesting. Yeah. How about you, Xavier?
I just remember, sorry, this is what comes to mind. Uncomfortable topics. For 2 weeks, you and I raved on Radiator 2 by Robert Yang. We just talked about that game so much because it's very out there, for the listeners that's played it. It's very gay. And also it makes you uncomfortable, right? It's almost cringe. And I feel like bringing that level of cringe and confronting that level of nudity in the scenarios in the games does bring a topic that could be discussed further, right? And I mean, for Robert, and if you've seen his work, it's very much a statement. He's making art rather than making exploration. But I think that kind of ways of presenting things that you wouldn't normally be able to present, it's great.
Yeah, funnily enough, one of the things that you mentioned in the paper, and this actually kind of slightly goes in the other direction. A point that Mei made there was about some of the subject matter can be quite difficult to kind of not necessarily to connect with, but actually just to kind of play through and experience, because you are dealing, like we said, this is often inspired by real world experiences. But then, funnily enough, a lot of these games you actually say in the paper, a lot of them look like messaging apps. And so, do you feel then that that it's a little easier to have players connect with this and then also experience that whole playthrough if the context that is provided is a little closer to a more contemporary real life experience that the average player will know from day to day?
Do you want to take that first, Mimi?
Sorry, that was a big, heavy question to throw at you there.
Well, I think, actually, I was thinking that, I like the idea of messaging apps for video games because I like the idea of the privacy and the communication, this privacy and communication thing that can help a lot to have many discussions and to bring some uncomfortable topics. I remember the one game that we were like analyzing, the chat was all about uncomfortable topics and it was like in a private context with a friend. So I feel, it's easier to bring topics that sometimes you don't know how to bring, but when you're in a chat with someone that you trust and someone that you love. So it's very interesting, yes. I would say that I like the messaging app. I think that's why we found also so many messaging apps, yes. Yeah. What do you think, Xavier?
So what you just said, which is really what I was thinking, was that, sorry, but I just blanked there. You know how in the visual novel, in the traditional sense, you have a text box on the bottom of the screen, you have some floating options, that's just part of the text. It doesn't really exist in the game, right? It's just an interface that's in front of you. And you may have chat bubbles perhaps. But suddenly a mobile phone interface really gives a lot of context. Whose phone is it? What can you do on the phone? Does it have a home screen? Is there a reply button? There's so many things that you can do. Suddenly it opens up possibilities in addition to the fact that people are just already familiar. So it's easier and more accessible in the sense that people know what to do on the phone, perhaps compared to an interface that they have to now learn their way around. But what I was thinking when you say privacy, I mean, that was, wow. I remember there was a few games I was looking at where I forgot what the exact name is called. It's something to do with bear in the forest, but this guy needed to escape from some strangers or danger in the forest. And then he got a text from the phone. Some stranger texted him to say, you need to go now. And this is what you need to do to survive, right? So his life is suddenly dependent on this phone to the stranger that he's never met. And you play through by basically him making decisions and talking to the strangers while also escaping danger. And the whole gameplay happens on that phone. So I just felt like there's a lot of opportunities, I think, in using phones, and people are already recognizing and doing things with them. So it's probably not a surprise that we see so many of them. And I just want to give a shout out to, TV shows also. We see them everywhere. So if you've seen Heartstopper, lots of messaging there. If you've seen Only Matters in the Building, lots of messaging on the TV there. And I think that's universal now. People know what to do with it.
So that brings up brings us to a nice point to wrap up this conversation, which has been fascinating. And I feel like there's a lot to learn from both your paper and the things that you're highlighting. But what would you like the FDG community to pay more attention to after you've done this work? What do you think would be the thing that you would like us most to pay more attention to?
What a question. Do you want me to go first? I can go first.
Go first.
I feel like Adrienne Shaw is like the bus factor of one in carrying out the archival work in her LGBTQ archives. That's not to say there's no other efforts out there. There's plenty of local city-based libraries and gay alliance archives that are covering their own city's work. But for games specifically, there's really only two. There's LGBTQ Games Archive, Video Game Archive, and then there's Represent Me here in Melbourne. But I did spoke to Elena, and I know she's probably doing her own thing in Sledgehammer. If you look at her website on Represent Me, they've stopped the archival effort now since 2020, and they've basically merged the effort back to the LGBTQ Video Game Archive. So if there is anything that I can signal boost, Adrienne definitely needs more people helping her out. So definitely use her work and also contribute back to the archive if you can.
How about you, Mei?
Okay, I think after this project, one of the things I would like the community to pay more attention to is the importance of the representation in the development of apps. In the development of video games, sorry. I think The diversity, when we were analyzing the diversity in the representation in the video games, we also found how it was important in the creativity. And I think that's very relevant in the way how many people took the freedom to develop any kind of game, and they really created a piece of arts and also many different things that they were very interesting. So I think for me, I really would like people to pay more attention in the importance of the diversity in the creativity, especially in arts design for creating and the develop of video games.
Especially the more fringe and underground stuff, isn't it? That doesn't get much attention. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. And also for our viewers out there, Adrian Shaw's website is lgbtqgamearchive.com, and we'll put the link in the YouTube just
we'll
right
get
up.
it in the description. Yeah.
Yes.
We'll put it in there. Absolutely.
Okay.
Production notes sorted. But yeah, sorry, I just want to say, Zav, Mimi, thank you so much for joining us. Also, again, to Zav for staying up, I believe, quite late to come and hang out with us today.
It's quite early for you, Tommy. It's okay.
We'll get there. We'll make it work. But for everyone else who's going to be catching the FDG conference, remember this is Queer Indie Games on itch.io 2013 to 2022. It's going to be at the Games Criticism and Analysis track on Wednesday, September 7th. Check out the paper, check out the talk. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And thank you both for joining us. This has been super interesting, and I wish you both the very best for the rest of the conference.
Yes. Thank you both.
Thank you. Okay. See you later.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Alrighty, that was fantastic. Really good conversation there. And a super interesting paper. So definitely go and check that out. Right, let's have a look. I need to jump down through my particular set of production notes. Oh, I've got Anne hanging around in the corner there. Hello, Anne. How are we doing?
Doing great. How
good.
are you, Tommy?
I'm good. That was a good chat. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that paper as well. It was
absolutely
cracking chat. That was good. Next up,
yeah.
We've got another episode of Best Paper Watch. Mike is continuing his artistic journey, easel in hand, as he appreciates the use of colour and some really good graphs.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Best Paper Watch. In today's episode, we've got another couple of great artworks for you from this year's conference, looking at a really interesting use of colour to communicate artistic intent and the results of experiments. So our first piece today is enabling real-time prediction of in-game deaths through telemetry in Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Now in this piece, the artists were interested in detecting events like player deaths in games of Counter-Strike Global Offensive using live data as it came in. So having a system that can look at the progress of a game and tell you when the players go about to die, where they're about to die potentially. Now the way that they did this was they took a bunch of metrics, including the equipment a player was carrying, how close other players were to it. And what they also found is that certain metrics were more useful for predicting deaths than others. Things like how many times a player had died on average so far, and also the equipment they were carrying as they came into proximity with enemies. So metrics that really make sense if we were thinking about what we would need to predict whether a player was about to die. And what we can see in this paper, there's a beautiful part of the artwork where they combine these beautiful red and blue lines that really convey the results of a data set. Well, I'm going to try and sort of capture that here myself. And you can see here how these red lines with different data points as the model's making predictions at different time steps compares with the blue lines, which show the actual player data as the game progressed. And this kind of thing could be useful for commentators or analysts, people making live productions on esports, or even for players spectating their own games in client. Now, our next piece today uses colour in a slightly different way. Massively multiplayer online role-playing games on promoting social well-being in the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, in this piece, the artists, they went out into a community of World of Warcraft players and asked them about their experiences of playing the game during the COVID-19 lockdowns. And what they found was that the motivations that people had for playing were largely socially driven. In fact, the main motivating factors, the main things that people got out of playing World of Warcraft during the pandemic were things like playing with friends, being part of a small guild, being able to regularly have social contact with people in these virtual worlds. They also found, as may not be surprising to you, that the amount of time that people spent playing these games increased during the COVID-19 pandemic, and which suggests that there's a connection there maybe in that these social bonds became more important, and so we sought out places where we could get them whenever we could. Now, the paper's full of really interesting findings like this and really interesting analyses of the social dynamics of these games. And in particular, I really like this recommendation that the authors make towards the end, where they suggest that specifically guilds and small groups are really important in these multiplayer games. Although there's a big community of players that we can bump into or even have PvP engagements with, what people really cared about were these spaces where they could choose who their friends were, they could choose who they hung out with. And as a result, that allowed them to focus their time in the world on positive interactions. And in the paper, there's some beautiful illustrations using greens and reds and yellows, really rich colors, to convey people's responses to the questionnaires that they ran. And I'm going to try and capture some of that here, the essence of the people in these surveys coming through. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Best Paper Watch. Today we looked at a couple of really great pieces of art that understand the use of colour to tell stories, whether that's a story of two very angry people about to kill each other in Counter-Strike, or two very adventurous people about to become best friends in World of Warcraft. Thanks so much for joining me. We'll be back with more tomorrow. Until then, stay safe and keep drawing.
Great, thanks again, Mike, for another wonderful episode of Best Paper Watch. In case you didn't catch it, this one was recorded in his mum's garden. Which, actually, if you watched last season's Best Paper Watch, you'll have noticed that perhaps you might have recognised that garden from before. I hope it was a really good episode. I haven't seen it yet. We're still waiting because we're going to inject all the episodes in afterwards, because this is the beauty of production. And we forgot to say this at the start of this episode, but we should probably say it now. Remember that these episodes of FDG TV are being pre-recorded, so if you are saying nice or not so nice things to us in the chat as it's happening, we might or might not have read it, but I'm definitely not going to respond to it live in the video. Speaking of responding to people live in the video, please give a warm welcome to our next guest today. This is Courtney Blamey. Of course, obligatory applause, which none of you can hear, but I can. But it was all for you. So Courtney is a PhD candidate at Concordia University in Montreal in Canada, and is here presenting a paper, Taking It Seriously, Bridging the Gap Between Player-Developer Understandings of Value-Driven Design in Games, which will, at the time of this video being released, have already happened, because this is being presented as part of the doctoral consortium. This is the magic of video production. But yes, Courtney, welcome to FDG TV. I hope you're having a great day.
Thank you. Yes, so, congratulations on being done with your talk, by the way.
Yes, it was very grueling and I made it through really well.
Yeah,
lots of great questions.
Everyone loved it.
For sure.
Yeah, and I had all the answers as well. It was great.
Wonderful.
It's always a big panic. You know how it is, particularly. Yeah. So Courtney's research looks at the way that games communicate meaning and value, and particularly how they're communicating that meaning and value through design to players. And then really your interest is how this is being tracked from initial design concept all the way to the final player perception. So I guess, could you tell us or give us an example of this value-driven design in a game and that maybe resonated with you that kind of helps frame the conversation for us a little bit?
Yeah, so I think the one that I would probably draw upon would be Spiritfarer. Is one of the ones that I want to focus on for the actual dissertation, because it looks at sort of grief as sort of a central value, and then we see that from initial design all the way through until, you know, the players looking at the characters in the eyes when they pass them through the gates and things like that. So there's Spiritfarer, and then my other one I would say, which is less of like an emotional based value, as it were, as more of a sort of mechanical value, is It Takes Two, which is, if people haven't played it, go play it. It is so worth it. I played it with one of my close friends and it was absolute chaos. But that one looks at sort of separation, estrangement, but also cooperation, right? Because obviously it being a two-player game, split screen multiplayer, as it were, cooperation is like one of those really key design pillars that tracks all the way through. And you can tell when you're playing it how they thought about cooperation in all these different ways, shapes, and forms. And it wasn't just the mechanics, it was the narrative, it was the music design, it was all of it, you know, the characters, everything. So that's kind of like, I would say, the two framing ones that I at least use to think about things. Yeah.
Excellent. So with that in mind, what drew you to pursue this area of research?
Yeah, so I kind of started off when I put my proposal together, I was looking really at how we talk about, well, the general discourse around like games for fun, and how like games don't have politics in them, games are just for fun. And how I was like, incorrect. And as do many other game scholars go, nope, things aren't made in a vacuum, fun fact. So that was kind of where I started off my sort of launch pad into it. And my MA thesis was on moderation mechanics in Overwatch. And that was looking at how players would take the moderation tools that Blizzard generated for them and would either co-opt them into their own way, or they would follow and adhere to what the kind of corporate lip service version of it was. So for me, it was like this real interest in, okay, so this is what designers are thinking, or what designers are trying to generate and what they're trying to communicate to players, or what their context for design is, whether that's, you know, this isn't a political game, but it's a shooter based in a military space, or, you know, we want to manage players' attitudes in a multiplayer space. Here's the thing we made. And then what's that player response, reaction, and reception to it? And that's what really interested me, was that we have a lot of research that looks at one and looks at the other. And that's why it's, you know, taking it seriously and bridging the gap, because I want to look at the whole process that happens. And it's not linear, it's circular and it's sporadic, and there's all kinds of things that exist around it at the same time too. So it's not a neat packaged structural type thing, but it's still fun to look at and unpick and try and at least trace some of the ebbs and flows of how the design and play inform each other. So that's for me why I was really interested in it, because I felt like there was something really fruitful in bridging that gap and sort of putting a name to it and pointing to things either for future developers, for current developers. My long-term goal is to be a professor in game design and game studies, so it's to help students think critically about what they're making. So that's kind of like, as like the 1 year, 4 year, and then, you know, 20-year plan that's attached to it as well, because, you know, got to always think 40 to 50 years ahead now.
I mean, we were planning for this years ago, like years in advance. We said we were going to do this chat show. That was always in the roadmap.
Absolutely.
So, thinking about the games that you're interested in exploring, you talked specifically there about Spiritfarer and It Takes Two, but in the paper, you actually had a different set of games that you were interested in. Can you tell us a little bit more about the games that you'd like to look at, and potentially even why those particular games became the focus?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, Spiritfarer was because it was heralded a lot critically for its ways of dealing with grief. And I'm kind of in this space of like, I've yet to really sit down and define it, because obviously I've just become a PhD candidate a month ago. Very excited. Thank you. So we've got kind of critical game design, that's one of my facets of this. And then there's emotional game design, that's kind of an up and coming way of creating design pillars. And so Spiritfarer sort of does the grief thing really well. And I thought that also, because it's been critically well received, and I believe the studio is based in Montreal, which is helpful for me, because, you know, people really like to teleconference now instead of actually meeting, which is fine. But that it was kind of, there was a practical element, but also like I had seen a lot of critical acclaim attached to it. And I across these games wanted to try and take a slice of one studio that was sort of indie, another studio that's sort of that AA, slightly bigger indie, which takes the form of Life is Strange True Colors, which is the second game I want to look at. And that's because it deals with a breadth of emotions attached to it and a breadth of values as a result of that, and how they present themselves. I mean, I'm saying this having not played these games yet. I played a little bit of Spiritfarer, but not the other two, because I'm kind of going into it and obviously doing my analysis fresh. So that for me was why I chose that one. And then I found a studio based in Boulder, Colorado, I believe, called Serenity Forge. And that's the game attached to that. It's very long. It's Half Past Date Romantic Distancing. And that game is about people trying to date during the pandemic as a long distance. I don't think it's a pandemic, sorry, long distance. But the reason I chose that studio was because Serenity Forge's founder really resonated with games as a medium for connection, because he felt really, really unwell, I think, when he was in his early 20s. And the only way he was able to sort of have a social life or anything was through games. And then he started to recognize, you know, the power and potential of games as a story medium, as a connection medium. And that's why he founded the studio. And so a lot of his games have a lot about connection as like a value embedded in it. And it's like, as a studio that almost on their manifesto says, we are dedicated to values in games, I was like, well, that kind of slots very nicely into what I'd like to talk about. So that's why I kind of have like an indie and then a sort of double A indie type situation. And then I have one that's a much smaller one that makes smaller games, but it's still, I mean, churning out quite a few, to be fair. I think they've been open since sort of mid 2000 or late 2000. Yeah. So that's kind of my reasoning behind those. Sorry.
No, sorry. That makes, thank you for describing that. That makes a lot of sense. And, you know, you were talking about looking at indies and AA indies. And we just, in our last segment, we were actually talking about queer indie games on itch.io. And I was wondering, you know, you've looked at Steam games, some of them are indies than others, but do you expect you would find different patterns if you looked at platforms such as the Apple Store or itch.io or even the Global Game Jam repository?
Oh, yeah. And I think the thing is that those platforms as distribution sites do attract very different kinds of games and some more experimental forms, I think, is the thing you'll find in like the itch.io games. There's a lot of horror games on itch.io as well, right? That's a really big market that's on there. So I think that you would find very different approaches maybe, and they'd be smaller because some of them are one single dev that's making it, and some of them are a team, if you look at the Global Game Jam ones. And I think you can see some really interesting, whilst not maybe fully fleshed out games from the Global Game Jam, like some really interesting mechanics and ideas and experimentations through like the Global Game Jam website. So yeah, I think you definitely find really different approaches to it. And I think, to be honest, it's a really good question to ask, because that could be directions to go, because this is looking very much at sort of your mainstream elements. Like I'm not taking on like an art game or anything like that, even though they bear, you know, total analysis because they're fabulous. And I think that as a result, probably future deviations from this, depending on what I generate, could definitely take the form of looking at, because a lot of queer games as well on itch.io and things like that, that really do kind of subvert your mainstream or hegemonic mechanics and things like that. So for sure, yeah, definitely would be different kinds of games and analysis that would come out from looking at different distribution platforms. 100%.
Right.
Absolutely. Excellent. Sorry, did I just speak over you, Anne?
Nope, you're good.
This is it. We come out the question and then we're like, which of us should speak? What's going on? So I guess I had a question about particularly the process that you're going through and the mechanisms that you're looking to employ. So, you know, typically we think of like think aloud protocols, which these offer as a pretty good way to have a critical analysis of games and help explore things like user experience in a lot of depth. You've chosen to apply a self-think aloud protocol. Could you just talk us a little through about what that means and why you took that particular direction, or why you proposed that direction for the research?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I had done it once for a class project in the first year of my PhD. And I played Hades, and I did the think aloud method to basically track my reactions too, because I was basically trying to reverse engineer what values might be in the game. So it was kind of like starting from the player end backwards. And so I had used that. And fun fact, when you're trying to play Hades and you're also trying to like do a critical analysis at the same time during the think aloud method, there's a lot of swearing that happens because you're basically trying to play, and then if you die you get really frustrated and you're like, oh, I guess death is one of those values that we can add into the mix. So for me, it was a really useful tool to listen back and get sort of my real-time reactions and thoughts, that when you sort of, because, you know, autoethnography is obviously a thing, you can write your notes simultaneously, but I found that pausing the game, writing notes, and then getting back into it generated a very different set of like outcomes and analyses than real-time play, and remembering that you're also a player in this. And I think that's always that odd song and dance you have to do as someone who researches games, is being like, I'm someone who is researching this game, but I'm also a player of this game. So unless you study players, if you study yourself as a player, you have to, that's why basically I ended up using the self think aloud method, because that way I get my, oh damn reaction, as well as my, this is very hegemonic because, you know, so I get a nice blend of the two. So that was my thinking for it, because it's basically my baseline for then hopefully talking to players, but that depends on the scope of the dissertation, because it's one of the things that might end up being shifted somewhere else. But I figured you can't, for me, it's a thing of the same as why I want to make a game at the end of this PhD is, you know, I kind of want to put the money where the mouth is. Like I need to play the games as well as speak to the devs to then make something. I can't just go, well, I played it once and it's fine and whatever. So that's why I want to use that self think aloud method.
Cool.
To really capture the moments.
Funnily enough, I was going to say
now we are talking.
We are talking to each other, but I just this conversation is actually quite apt because I'm in the middle of playing Hades at the moment, and I was just sort of thinking, like, most of mine is just expletive based. I'm pretty sure at this point, like maybe I think that's the only thing that escapes my mouth.
Yeah, maybe that's one of the values.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Like for me, it's a roguelite, so frustration and repetition is definitely a thing, but there's something really telling when you listen back and hear your emotional reactions, and not like what's the one I'm looking for, the like pragmatic version of you playing the game, when you have your actual player hat on and you're like, damn it, and you're like, why is it so hard, and blah blah blah. You know, difficulty then becomes a value that you can reflect on.
Absolutely. Yeah, it actually reminds me a little bit of autoethnography style of research. So makes sense. So, you know, you talked about your long-term goals, but I wanted to ask, in an ideal world, what would you like the outcome of your PhD research on value-driven design to be?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. For me, it's a big part of it is getting the experience to make something as well. I think that's something that is becoming more and more pertinent and valuable as candidates going into teaching games and studying games. So for me, what I really want to come out from this dissertation is sort of a set of guidelines, recommendations, key takeaways from the experience of speaking to players, speaking to developers, making a game myself, playing the games myself, that can help shape and kind of guide those who want to engage in value-driven design or emotions-based emotional game design, critical game design, for mainstream and industry, but also for your academic pursuits, right? Because there is a big push now. I mean, there has been for years, to be fair, but I'd say more and more now as folks' technical prowess are upping their game, making games as a research method is huge, and it's only really just starting to come into like the light in a way where it's really useful and can question a lot of things. And that's really what I want to come out from it, is kind of like an industry side, but also like recognizing that making games can actually continue to push as a method of academic rigor, as it were. You know, it's not just, oh, I made a thing and it does this. It's like, no, actually there's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes, and there's a lot more thought that goes into it. And the same as writing a book, making a documentary, you know, making a film, things like that. So that's kind of continuing to champion the potential of games, I think, is really the TLDR, TM at the end of it is the making the potential of games even more prevalent. But I think a lot of people are championing that attitude too as well. And that's reflected in my lit review already, where I'm like, everyone's talking about this potential thing, so let's keep it going.
I mean, excellent. I think to bring our chat to a close, it's really right there in the title, right? We're taking it seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, so good.
It was almost as if I was going to say, it was almost as if I planned that, but I really didn't.
No, that was great.
Well, Courtney, thank you very much for joining us. Is this your first FDG then? I take it.
This will be my first FDG, yeah.
Oh,
and what a location for
it. Yes.
Trapped within the confines of this Zoom call.
This tiny box.
I'm having a great time though. It's great. It's great.
Yeah.
Well, no, I hope that you've already had a great doctoral consortium today, as we know. Yes. But also I hope you have a great time at the remainder of the conference. And for everyone else, don't forget to check out the paper, Taking It Seriously, Bridging the Gap Between Player-Developer Understandings of Value-Driven Design in Games. And so, yeah, thank you once again. And
thank you, Courtney.
Have a great week, and we'll speak to you again soon. Alrighty, there you go, everyone. Courtney Blamey, PhD candidate at Concordia University over in Canada. Taking it seriously, because we've got to take it seriously, and we're all taking it seriously. That was a great conversation. How are we doing, Anne?
We're doing great. How are you, Tommy?
Going strong. I'm taking this seriously.
Thinking about biscuits. You're taking your biscuits seriously.
Still thinking about biscuits. Biscord is happening.
Biscord. Playing Hades on Biscord.
Wasn't playing Hades during the conversation. That did come up in our production thing. Is Tommy playing Hades right now? No. My Switch is in the other room.
Antonius doesn't trust any of us.
No. Playing games on the job. What's he like?
We only talk about games on the job.
Speaking of the job and games.
Yes.
What's happening tomorrow at FDG?
Well, Tommy, tomorrow we've got the Game AI track, which is close to our hearts at FDG TV for some of y'all. Who
everyone except you, actually.
Well, it's okay.
You're an honorary member of the Game AI crew. We love you.
There we go. And if you're at FDG in person, there's a guided tour of the old city tomorrow, which is very exciting.
Definitely worth checking out. And so tomorrow, FDG TV, we're going to be talking about animations and art with Dagmar Lofsdotter. And we're going to be looking at the Chinese games industry with Robin Sloan and Haley Austin. Both of those really interesting papers that we read in advance prior to our conversations. And I'm looking forward to chatting with all of our guests. It's going to be a good day. And
absolutely.
Mike's taking the Best Paper Watch journey continues. He's actually going into London.
Doesn't he live in London?
Yeah, but London's a big place. So
gotcha.
I think when it says here it takes him to London, I'm assuming, well, his mum's garden isn't in London. I know that much.
That's fair. That's fair.
But I'm assuming he's going into the city.
Or it's in his backyard. We don't know.
I don't even know if he has a yard, to be honest.
That's a good point.
Anyway, but I've also got a reminder to everyone to make sure to participate over in the Discord server. And what are they participating in?
So we are going to be running a community photo challenge on the Discord. So there will be themes posted, and we're asking people to post pictures based on those themes in the Discord, and we will feature some of them on an episode of FDG TV.
Excellent. Going to get fun fact. Yeah, Antonius just says here, there's a fun fact if there's no actual Discord, but we're going to find out. And then if there isn't a Discord, then you're not going to get to see this bit because I'll cut it out. But if there is a Discord, I'm going to keep this in just to show.
We'll just edit like that TikTok voice over it, and it's like instead of Discord, it says Twitter.
TikTok. Just me. TikTok. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. People are going to love it. All right. With that, we'll bring this episode to a close. Thank you very much to Zav Ho, to Meme Pere Escobar, and also to Courtney Blamey, who are our guests today. Thank you very much to our top production team, Mike and Antonius, for making sure that we have all the right information in front of us and the appropriate amount of heckling in my ear. Thank you very much to and my wonderful co-host, who you've been
And
fantastic today.
And to Zoe.
And to Zoe. We'll maybe have both cats on tomorrow.
We'll see.
Don't know.
I'm not sure what their contract says.
We'll get a call to their agent afterwards.
Okay. And of course, thank you to Tommy, our wonderful host of FDG TV
Presser of
2022.
Buttons. I am the man that presses all the buttons. And of course, to all of you for tuning in and supporting this nonsense. We'll be back with more of this nonsense tomorrow.
See you then.